In studying persuasion in your life, the obvious question is what percentage of your daily communication is motivated by your desire to influence someone else, to convince them, to cause someone else to take action? What percentage of your time every day is spent persuading? Speaking of percentages, did you know that one of the oft-quoted percentages in the field of communication study is that 93% of our communication is actually nonverbal? We'll look at that statistic more in a minute. But if this is true, then to be good at persuasion, we need to understand the relationship between nonverbal communication and persuasion. This is the topic of this video: persuasive nonverbal communication. It's important to ask where this 93% statistic comes from and if it's valid. Dr. Albert Mehrabian, who wrote the book Silent Messages in 1981, spent significant time researching nonverbal communication. Specifically, he found that 38% of a message is conveyed with our vocal variations, and 55% is conveyed using other nonverbals like facial expressions, gestures, and other non-language communication. This leaves 7% of our messages expressed using our language. Dr. Mehrabian's research has been supported by other researchers in the area of nonverbal communication, although some might reach a slightly different percentage. I think that while we can state that this 93% statistic is a valid research finding, we should also say that the percentage can and does vary from message to message and from person to person. The point is, regardless of the exact percentage, what we say nonverbally is incredibly important. And if applied to our study of persuasion, we can say that if you are attempting to be an effective persuader, you must learn how to effectively use your nonverbal communication in your persuasion efforts. Conversely, you also need to understand how others might be using nonverbal persuasion to influence you. In this video, we will not attempt to tackle all the different ways that we communicate nonverbally. There are other sources for this, such as textbooks and communication research articles. What we will say briefly is that nonverbal communication, and therefore persuasion, can be expressed in some of the following ways: the environment that we create, how close or far away we are from others when speaking, how we carry ourselves and express ourselves physically, such as with our gestures or our posture, our use of touch, and how and if we touch and in what situations, our physical appearance, and how we express ourselves with facial and eye expressions. This is certainly not an all-inclusive list of nonverbal communication means. In this video, what we will do is give some examples of how nonverbal communication can be incorporated into persuasive efforts. We will look at the importance of nonverbal communication in the persuasive process by thinking about the Aristotelian concepts of ethos, logos, and pathos, or credibility, logic, and passion. These three concepts interweave themselves in many of the persuasive theories that we have discussed in this video series in one form or another. Let's state first that nonverbal communication is important in our persuasion efforts because it can demonstrate our ethos or our credibility. First impressions are critical, and people form those first impressions very quickly. Some would say that resumes are looked at for less than a minute. We form an opinion about a speaker as soon as they walk on the stage. And that initial handshake is often how we size up a new business contact or a person we're meeting. If you're going to be a person of influence, a persuader, it's important to consider what message you are conveying when meeting people. Are you being perceived as a credible spokesperson or a person to be listened to? Every nonverbal message you are sharing, whether you're aware of it or not, speaks volumes from expressions, dress, attitude, tone of voice, and facial expressions. These things are actually speaking louder than anything you say. And people continue to watch you as the relationship develops. They watch and listen. The people you meet and are in relationships with will form opinions about you. But if you're going to be listened to, you must present yourself as credible, as a person who is informed about credibility and prepared. We can state, second, that nonverbal communication is important in our persuasion efforts because it can show our intent to be logical in persuasion. Think about this for a minute. Have you ever had someone present an idea to you, meaning something they wanted to influence your thinking about, and right away you get the impression that their appeal is solely based on emotion? If that's all their persuasion is, we tend to discredit it. So how do you portray to others that you are logical in your persuasion? How do you portray this non-verbally? Let's connect logical and ethical for a moment. If you are ethical in your persuasion, you are being an audience-centered person. You are persuading because you have the other person's best interest in mind. The connection between logical and ethical is that logical arguments are not fallacy-based arguments or arguments designed to be manipulative by using false or illogical conclusions. To convey this intent non-verbally means that your demeanor, your facial expressions, your eyes, your voice must all focus on honesty and empathy. Your nonverbals must express sincerity because what you are saying, the language part of your message, is logical in nature. We can state, third, that nonverbal communication is important in our persuasion efforts because it can show our passion in our persuasion. Earlier I mentioned that people are and should be cautious if they perceive a persuasive message is based strictly on emotional appeal. Our persuasive messages should not be based strictly on emotional appeal. But when we say that our nonverbal persuasion should demonstrate our passion, what we're saying is if people are going to be influenced or persuaded, what they need to see is that we are passionate about what we are saying. Think about it. If someone were trying to convince you, but they acted like they could care less one way or the other, are you very motivated? Are you motivated to be convinced? No. Pathos or passion is an important ingredient, an important part of persuasion. We can express this passion non-verbally in all sorts of ways, but most important it should be shown as an honest expression of how you really feel. Passion is expressed by posture, the excitement of your gestures, the way your eyes light up, your vocal quality, such as the speed of your words, and if your words are from the heart. If you are passionate about something, you should let your nonverbals do the talking. And if you do, people will listen. They will listen because your nonverbals are saying that your words are important. The reality is that people will believe your nonverbal communication long before they assess the validity of your spoken communication. People look at the totality of what you're saying, meaning that people examine your nonverbal communication very closely when assessing if your persuasive argument is worth hearing. If communication is creating and sharing meaning, and persuasion is the motive or intent for creating and sharing that message, then we also need to understand that nonverbal communication is 93% of our persuasion. Question: are you effectively using your nonverbal messages to enhance your persuasive efforts? If not, you should be. See you in the next video.